The ship was going to kill me before I even got inside it. That was the first thing the proximity alert told me. Not in those exact words, of course. The scanner just read the electromagnetic field bleeding off the hull and classified it as lethal. My little salvage pod rattled like a tin can in a storm as I pushed it closer anyway, because the pay was 40,000 credits, and I had 11 left in my account, and a repair debt on my tools that was growing interest by the day. My name is Dara Voss. I fix things for a living. Mostly things other people have given up on. The ship hanging dead in the dark ahead of me was 14 kilometers long. 14. I kept saying the number in my head because it did not feel real. The biggest warship in the current human fleet ran 4 kilometers stern to bow. This thing made that look like a commuter shuttle. It floated without power, without lights, without any signal on any frequency I could detect. It was just there, vast and black against the stars, shaped like something between a blade and a cathedral. The design was nothing I recognized. No registry markings. No transponder code. The salvage company's manifest listed it as unclassifiable, which in my experience meant someone had tried to classify it and failed badly enough that they stopped trying. 3 alien salvage crews had boarded before me. The first crew came back. 2 of the 4 members. They could not explain what happened to the other 2, and they could not explain why they refused to speak about anything they had seen inside. The salvage company noted this as a minor complication in the briefing document. I remember reading those exact words on the transit out here. Minor complication. The second crew did not come back at all. The third crew sent a transmission 4 seconds long. It was audio only, no video, and it was 4 seconds of a sound that the company's linguist described as screaming in an unidentified language. Then nothing. The salvage company described this as an additional minor complication. I was the 4th attempt. They gave me a bonus offer this time. Hazard pay on top of the standard rate. I told them the hazard pay was not enough, and they agreed immediately, which told me they were desperate, which should have told me to walk away. Instead, it told me they must really want what was inside that ship. Desperation in an employer is information. I filed it away and packed my tools. My pod docked on the underside of the hull with a sound like a coin dropped in an empty room. Magnetic clamps. I checked them 3 times. Then I cut through the outer plating manually because there was no power to work the standard entry ports, and I dropped down into the dark. The first corridor was wide enough to drive a vehicle through. The ceiling was 4 meters up. The walls curved slightly inward, a design choice I had never seen before, and the floor was made of something that was not metal, but rang like it when I tapped my boot against it. My suit lights threw long shadows down the passage in both directions, and I stood there for a moment, just breathing and listening. Nothing. The air inside was stale but breathable, which should have been impossible after however long this ship had been out here. My scanner read it as recycled air. Functional atmospheric processors running somewhere in the dark on no power I could detect. I made a note of that. Unexplained functional systems were either a very good sign or a very bad one, and I had learned not to decide which until I had more information. I walked deeper in. The scale of the thing became real the further I went. Not just the corridor width, but the proportions of everything. The door frames, the handholds along the walls, the spacing of the access panels, the height of the instrument clusters I passed. Everything was built for a being roughly human in shape. 2 arms, 2 legs, upright posture, roughly my reach. Nothing in the alien salvage market built things to human scale. There was no reason for anything out here to be built to human scale. I kept walking. The engine room was 6 levels down and half a kilometer along the central spine of the ship. I found it by following the low-frequency vibration I could feel through my boots, a deep rhythmic pulse, like a heartbeat from something enormous and very far away. The door was sealed but not locked. It swung open when I pushed it, which told me someone had designed it to open from outside for maintenance access, which told me someone had designed it with mechanics in mind. I stepped inside. The engine room was the size of a sports stadium. The ceiling disappeared into darkness above me, and the chamber stretched in every direction further than my lights could reach. In the center sat the primary drive core, and it was the most beautiful piece of engineering I had ever seen in my life. Not because it was ornate, because it was clear. Every component was logically placed, each system connected to the next, in a sequence that made immediate, obvious sense to someone who understood how these things worked. Whoever built this had been thinking about the person who would one day need to fix it. They had been thinking about me, or someone like me. I walked up to the primary interface panel. It was dark, no power, the surface cold under my gloves. I ran my scanner over it, and it told me the same thing it had been telling me since I boarded. No active power signature. No signal. No electronic activity of any kind. I put my hand on the panel anyway. The ship woke up. Not with a surge of light and a blare of alarms. Not dramatically. It woke the way something wakes after a very long sleep when it finally hears a sound it has been waiting for. A warmth moved through the panel under my palm. Then a soft vibration. Then, one by one, lights began to come on in the engine room. Not the harsh white of emergency systems, but a deep amber glow. The color of late afternoon. The color of a room where someone has been working for a long time. The interface panel filled with text. Not alien script. Not a language I had to decode. The letters were a form of English, so old that some of the characters were shaped differently, but I could read it. I could read all of it. It was a diagnostic report. Not a greeting. Not a warning. A mechanics report. A list of damaged systems, failed components, degraded materials, fractured conduits. Subsystem by subsystem. The ship was telling me what was broken. The list was long. It was very long. It read like the damage log of a vessel that had been in sustained combat for years and then sat dead in space for longer than I had a number for. I stood in the amber light of a dead ship that had just told me its problems, and I did the only thing that made sense to me. I started reading. The list ran to 47 pages. I read all of them, slowly, standing at the panel, with my scanner running secondary checks on each item the ship flagged. The systems were complex but not foreign. The engineering logic was familiar in a way I could not immediately explain. I understood this ship the way you understand a sentence in your own language even when some of the words are new. The underlying grammar was mine. At the end of the diagnostic report, after 47 pages of technical fault listings, the panel showed one more entry. Crew manifest. Last active crew. One species listed. One line of classification below it. Human. Date of last crew presence. 47,000 years prior. I read that number 4 times. Then I sat down on the floor of the engine room because my legs decided they were done standing for a moment. The ship waited. The amber lights stayed steady. The deep rhythmic pulse I had felt through my boots was stronger now, more even, like breathing that had become calm. All around me in the enormous dark of the engine room, systems were spinning up one by one, quiet as patience, steady as stone. 47,000 years. I sat on the floor and looked at that number on the panel until it stopped being a number and became something else entirely. A weight, a distance, a fact so large it pushed everything else out of my head for a while. The ship did not rush me. It had been waiting for this long. It could wait a little longer. Eventually I got up. I pulled out my tools. I looked at page 1 of the diagnostic report. I got to work. The first repair took 6 hours, and it was just the secondary atmospheric circulation relay on level 3. A failed coupling, a corroded junction, 2 feed lines that had lost pressure integrity over what I now understood was an incomprehensible span of time. I replaced what I could with materials from my kit, fabricated the rest from components I harvested from non-critical systems nearby, and when I reactivated the relay, the ship registered it with a soft pulse of light through the panel nearest to me. I had been thanked by machines before. Equipment that chimed confirmation. Vehicles that ran smoother after a tune. The feeling was always the same quiet satisfaction of a problem solved. This was different. The pulse felt deliberate, considered. Like something enormously patient had noticed what I did and chose to acknowledge it specifically. I moved on to the next item on the list. The days blurred together. I stopped counting them by the second rotation of my sleep schedule and started counting them by completed repairs instead. 14 repairs, 22, 31. The ship responded to each one, not with drama, not with fanfare, but with a consistent attentiveness that was impossible to ignore once I noticed it. Panels lit up near where I was working before I reached them. Access hatches opened as I approached. When I needed to cross to a section I had not yet visited, the lighting in the corridors ahead of me adjusted to guide me there. The ship was helping. I started talking to it on the third day, not asking questions, not expecting answers. Just narrating my work the way I always had when I was alone with a difficult repair job. Describing what I was seeing, what I thought the problem was, what I intended to do about it. It was habit. I had been doing it since I was old enough to hold a wrench, and too young to have anyone to talk to while I did. The ship listened. I know that sounds strange, but there is a quality to being heard by something, even a machine, and the ship had it. When I spoke while working, the ambient hum of the systems around me shifted very slightly in register. It was not language. It was more like the way a person leans forward when something interests them. I named it Gideon on the fourth day. It was a reflex, not a decision. I had dropped a repair tool, and it had rolled under a conduit housing, and I had said, out loud with some feeling behind it, the name of the first tool I ever broke as a child, and spent 3 weeks figuring out how to fix. Gideon was what I called that old wrench. The name came out, and then I looked up at the ceiling of the corridor I was in, and said, "That is what I am calling you, by the way." And the lights around me did something I had not seen them do before. They warmed. A degree or two, not much, but perceptible. The color of the light in that corridor went from amber to something closer to gold. I picked up my tool and kept working. By the 8th day, I had restored partial power to 11 of the ship's 43 primary systems. By the 14th, I had the main power distribution network running at 30% capacity, which was enough to start the secondary engine array, and enough for Gideon to begin running active diagnostics on systems I had not yet reached. The repair list on the panel updated in real time now. Some items crossed themselves off as adjacent systems came back online and compensated. New items appeared as Gideon found problems the initial diagnostic had missed. It was a collaboration. I had done partnership repairs before, working alongside other mechanics on big salvage jobs. This felt like that, except the other mechanic was a ship the size of a city and communicated entirely through diagnostic readouts and the quality of ambient light. It worked better than most of my human partnerships. On day 18, I found the archives. I had been working on a data recovery system in the lower aft section, a delicate job requiring careful power sequencing to avoid corrupting stored information, when the system came live, and the interface panel nearest to me displayed a single line of text. Archive access. Category. Engagement records. Authorization. Crew mechanic. Unrestricted. I stared at that for a long time. Then I opened the first file. The engagement records were logs. Not text logs, not the dry summary entries I expected. They were experiential records, something between a film and a memory, visual and audio and data, combined into a format I could access through the interface panel. I sat cross-legged on the floor of the aft section, with my back against a conduit housing, and I went through them one by one. The records were old. The oldest predated any civilization the galactic history books acknowledged. They showed Gideon in combat. Not exercises, not tests. Real engagements with something I could not identify. Something that appeared on sensors as a distortion rather than an object. A region of wrongness moving through space. In every record, Gideon fought it. In every record, the crew, the human crew who moved through these corridors and sat at these panels and slept in the quarters I had been sleeping in, fought alongside the ship with a partnership so fluent it looked like a single organism. They lost ground in some records. They drove it back in others. In every engagement without exception, the crew took losses. Names appeared in the post-engagement reports. Names that were removed from the active crew list and transferred to a different list that the ship designated with a symbol I recognized from old Earth traditions as the marker for the fallen. The records spanned decades of engagements. The crew changed slowly, as some names moved to that other list and new names appeared. But Gideon remained. Gideon always remained. Repaired between engagements by the mechanics who treated the ship the way I was treating it now, with tools and patience, and the specific kind of love that goes into fixing something you refuse to let die. The last engagement record was different from the others. The crew was smaller by then, fewer names on the active list than any previous record. They flew into that final engagement knowing what the outcome would be. I could see it in the way the record was structured. The way the final pre-mission log entries were made by each crew member, careful and complete, and worded like things meant to last. The captain's final log was 3 seconds long. She was older than any of the previous captains I had seen in the records. Her voice was steady. She looked directly into the recording and said, in a dialect of English so archaic I had to replay it twice to parse it, "Hide. Someone worthy will find you." Then she walked away from the recording, and the ship flew to its last battle without her in the captain's seat, because she was already running toward the engine room to do the thing that needed doing to end the engagement permanently. She did not survive it. Gideon did. I sat with that for a long time in the amber quiet of the aft section. Then I closed the archive and went back to my repairs, because crying was something I would do later, and there was still a great deal of work to do. On day 22, the alien ships arrived. I was in the middle of recalibrating the secondary navigation array when Gideon's newly restored sensor network registered contact. The display nearest to me shifted from my repair schematics to a sensor overlay, showing 3 vessels moving toward us on a clear intercept course. I recognized the hull signatures, Kreth Dominion Survey Class, fast and well-armed, with the kind of sensor packages that did not belong on a survey vessel, and everyone pretended not to notice. I kept working on the navigation array. The Kreth ships closed to hailing distance and opened a communication channel. I ignored it. I had a 3-way power junction to stabilize and the Kreth could wait. They hailed me 4 more times over the next hour. On the 5th attempt I answered, because I had finished the junction and I had coffee brewing in the quarters I had claimed near the central spine, and I was ready for a break anyway. The face that appeared on the communication panel was scaled and angular, the standard Kreth official expression, which was a blend of authority and impatience. He introduced himself as a survey coordinator and then delivered a prepared speech about galactic heritage, shared scientific responsibility, and the importance of not allowing a vessel of this historical significance to remain in the control of a single unaffiliated salvager. He meant me. He used the word unaffiliated the way someone uses a word they have chosen very carefully to be polite about something they find deeply offensive. I listened to the whole speech. Then I said, "No thank you," and closed the channel. The communication panel went dark. Gideon's sensor display updated. All 3 Kreth ships were now in Gideon's active targeting system. I had not done that. I had been sitting in my chair drinking coffee. Gideon had done it independently, silently, and with a precision that the targeting overlay made very clear. Each ship had a targeting solution calculated to its specific vulnerability points, cross-referenced with the Kreth vessel classification database Gideon apparently had access to in its restored archives. The Kreth ships received whatever Gideon transmitted to them regarding their tactical situation. They left. No weapons fire. No further communication. No delay. They turned and accelerated out of sensor range in under 4 minutes, and I sat in my chair and looked at the targeting display for a moment before I said, "You did not need to do that." The display shifted. The targeting data cleared. In its place, a single line appeared in the old archaic English of Gideon's interface. "Crew security, Captain. Standard protocol." I looked at that line for a long time. Then I looked at the coffee in my hand, and at the repair list on the panel to my left, and at the darkness of space on the external view screen ahead of me, and I thought about the word captain in a context that had nothing to do with anything in my previous life. I had come out here running from something. I had taken a job that paid well because I needed money, and because I needed to be far away from everything familiar. I had walked into a dead ship expecting a difficult salvage job and some hazard pay, and instead, I had found 47,000 years of history and a machine that had been waiting for someone who could hear it. I did not consider myself captain material. I did not consider myself, if I was being honest, material for much beyond fixing broken things in difficult circumstances. The display waited, patient as it had always been patient, steady as the amber light that had not wavered once since the ship woke up under my hand. "Captain," it said again, quietly, in the way a very old thing states a fact it has already decided. I finished my coffee. "All right," I said, to no one, and to everything around me. "Show me what else needs fixing." The repair list expanded. There was a great deal more to do. The news that a human had a functioning ancient warship of unknown classification reached the Galactic Compact 14 days after the Kreth Dominion survey vessels filed their encounter report. I know this because Sariko told me later, in the specific way that diplomats share information they consider valuable, which is carefully, and with a slight delay, that suggests they have thought about whether to share it at all. By the time the compact knew, 3 other parties already did. The Kreth Dominion filed a formal grievance claiming salvage rights under galactic law, despite the fact that they had been unable to successfully board the vessel. Before me, and galactic law on this point was notably clear. Their grievance was 11 pages long and cited 42 precedents. I read it when Gideon routed it to my display, and then I noted that none of the precedents actually applied to a vessel that predated galactic law by approximately 45,000 years, and set it aside. A consortium of academic institutions from 6 different species sent a delegation. They did not send ships. They sent a very long formal request to open the vessel for scientific study, co-signed by 217 researchers, accompanied by a document explaining in considerable detail how important this discovery was to the field of galactic archaeology. I appreciated that they asked instead of arriving with weapons hot. I told them I would consider it. I had no intention of considering it, but the asking deserved acknowledgement. The third party did not send communication at all. They simply appeared. 7 ships, heavy class, the kind of vessels that were not classified as warships in any registry, but were so comprehensively armed that the distinction was theoretical. They held position at long range and did nothing else. No hail, no movement, just present, in the way that large and dangerous things are present when they want you to know they are there, without saying anything that could be used against them later. I had been working on the long-range weapon systems when they arrived. This was relevant. I had been avoiding the weapon systems, not because they frightened me, though they did, but because working on systems that complex required a level of understanding I was building toward, rather than possessing immediately. The engine, the navigation, the atmospheric and power systems, I understood those. They were difficult, they were old, but the engineering logic was consistent with things I knew. The weapon systems were different. They operated on principles I recognized only in the broadest sense, like someone who knows what a word means in the abstract but has never used it in a sentence. But I had been studying the schematics. Every night after repairs were done, I sat with the weapon system documentation, and I read, and I thought, and I asked Gideon questions by typing them into the interface panel, because Gideon could not answer in spoken language, but could respond in text, and the responses were always precise and informative, and occasionally, I thought, a little impatient with how long it was taking me to understand. The 7 unidentified ships held their position for 18 hours. Then they moved. Not toward me, toward a position that Gideon's tactical display immediately identified as an intercept angle on my egress routes. All 7 of them, coordinated, quiet. If I wanted to leave, I would have to go through them, or around them, in a direction that put me very far from any outpost or shipping lane. I was not planning to leave, but they did not know that. I finished the section of weapon system diagnostic I was working on, recorded my notes, and then I went to the communication panel and opened a channel to all 7 vessels simultaneously. "I see what you are doing," I said. "I am going to need you to stop." Silence for a moment. Then a response came from the lead vessel. The voice was Velen, which meant the crew was Velen, or wanted me to think they were, and the Velen were a species with a long history of operating outside the jurisdictions that technically covered this region of space. The voice said that they were a private research expedition, and that they had concerns about the safety of an unqualified individual operating such a potentially hazardous vessel. I let the word unqualified go. I had heard worse. "I am qualified," I said. "I am the one who got it running." A pause, then, "The vessel should be studied in a controlled environment by teams with the appropriate expertise." "It is being studied," I said, "by me, in this environment. I appreciate your concern." I closed the channel. I looked at Gideon's tactical display. The 7 ships had not moved. I thought for a moment about what I had read in the weapon system documentation the night before, about the active targeting protocols and the range classifications, about what Gideon was capable of doing to 7 vessels at this distance if I chose to engage those systems. I did not choose to engage them. Instead, I opened the communication channel again and I said, very clearly, "Gideon is now running active targeting on all 7 of your vessels. I have not authorized firing. I am asking you one more time to remove yourself from this position." I did not wait for a response. The 7 ships left within 20 minutes. I watched them go on the sensor display, and I was not satisfied exactly, because the situation was not resolved, only deferred. But they were gone, and I had work to do. 3 days later, the Galactic Compact sent a single ship. Small vessel, diplomatic registry, no weapons that Gideon's sensors could detect. It requested permission to dock, and I granted it, because a diplomat was more useful than a fleet right now, and I had questions that needed answers, from someone with access to good information. The diplomat who came aboard was a Veth. Veth were old, even by alien standards. They lived long lives, and they accumulated a quality over the course of those lives that was not quite wisdom, and not quite weariness, but something between the two. This one was named Sariko, which he told me immediately upon boarding, and he stepped off the docking ramp and stood in Gideon's hangar and looked at the walls. He looked at them the way you look at something you thought was a legend. He stood there for a long moment without speaking. I waited. "We thought you were a myth," he said finally. "Not to me, to the ship, to the walls." "The ship," I said, "or humans." He turned and looked at me. His eyes were the pale gold of old paper, and they held in them the quality I associated with Veth, that blend of long experience and present attention. "Both," he said. He came with me to the central conference room, a space I had cleaned and repaired enough to be functional, and we sat across from each other at a table that had last been used 47,000 years ago, and he told me about the silence. He did not call it that at first. He worked around the edges of it the way someone works around a wound before they can bring themselves to look at it directly. He spoke about galactic history in the broad sense, about the records that had survived across species, and the gaps in those records that could not be explained by war or disaster, or the ordinary losses of time. Then he said the word. The silence. He said it was what the Compact called a period beginning approximately 49,000 years ago and ending approximately 47,000 years ago. A period in which 17 spacefaring civilizations ceased to exist. Not conquered, not absorbed, not destroyed in the sense of ruins and wreckage and bones. Simply gone. Their systems were still there. Their planets remained in orbit. The physical infrastructure was intact, but every being of every species, gone, as though they had been erased. He said the Compact's historians had studied the silence for generations and had no satisfactory explanation. He said various theories existed. He said none of them were convincing. He said this while watching me very carefully. I was watching him very carefully too, because while he spoke I had been doing math. The silence began 49,000 years ago and ended 47,000 years ago. Gideon's crew records ended 47,000 years ago. The final engagement, the one the last captain flew knowing she would not come back, had occurred at a date I could now correlate against the Compact's historical timeline. It correlated exactly. The silence did not simply end. It did not run its course or exhaust itself or choose to stop. Something stopped it. Something had been fighting it for 2,000 years, and finally, in the last engagement, with a smaller crew than any before, had done whatever needed to be done to drive it back. Gideon knew this. Gideon had been there. I looked at Sariko across the old table and I said, "The silence did not end on its own." He was quiet for a long moment. "No," he said, "we do not believe it did. This ship stopped it." Another pause, longer this time. "That is what we believe," he said. "Yes." I thought about the last captain's voice in the 3-second recording. I thought about the crew list growing shorter across decades of engagement records. I thought about Gideon sitting alone in the dark for 47,000 years, waiting. "It is not gone," I said. Sariko's pale gold eyes did not waver. "No," he said, "we do not believe it is." The amber lights of the conference room held steady around us. Outside, in the dark between stars, somewhere at a distance that had once seemed safely immeasurable, something that the galaxy had spent 47,000 years trying to forget was, apparently, not done. The first system went dark, 7 weeks after my conversation with Sariko. Dark is not the right word. Dark implies the absence of light, which implies the absence of physical matter, which implies the ordinary results of violence or neglect. What happened to the Relin system was not dark in that sense. The star was still there. The planets were still in their orbits. Every piece of rock and ice and frozen atmosphere remained exactly where physics required it to be. The people were gone. 412 million Relin, 3 species sharing the system, gone without a signal or a record or a trace. The compact sent survey ships within a day of losing contact, and the survey ships reported in with clear and detailed scans of a completely intact planetary system, from which every living thing had been removed. The compact classified it as an unexplained mass disappearance. They did this because the alternative classification was the silence, and classifying it as the silence meant acknowledging that it had returned, and acknowledging that required deciding what to do about it. Nobody in the compact wanted to make that decision. I made it for them, in a limited way, by spending the next 3 weeks working 18-hour days on Gideon's weapon systems. I understood them now. That was the thing that had changed since those early nights of reading schematics and asking Gideon questions. I could not have told you exactly when understanding arrived, because it was not a single moment, but a gradual process, a slow accumulation of comprehension that reached a point where the next question I was about to ask answered itself before I finished forming it. The weapon systems were not, at root, weapons the way conventional armaments were weapons. They did not project force in the direction of a target. They projected something else, something that did not have a clean name in any language I knew, a directed negation of the specific properties that allowed the silence to do what it did. The silence unmade things by imposing a kind of absence on them, a removal of the fundamental conditions for existence. What Gideon's systems did, at full function, was impose the opposite, a reaffirmation, a re-establishment. The silence met the beam and found that what it was trying to remove had been, in that moment, made more permanently present than it had been before. I understood the principle. I did not fully understand the engineering. I kept working. The second system went dark 4 weeks after the first. The third went dark 9 days after that. The compact held an emergency session, and the recordings of it were classified within an hour of the session ending. But Sariko, who had remained in his diplomatic vessel docked in Gideon's hangar, because I found him useful to have nearby, and he seemed to find Gideon useful to have nearby, summarized the outcome for me. The compact had no plan. They had conventional fleets and conventional weapons, and 47,000 years of collective intelligence, and none of it was relevant, because conventional weapons had never worked against the silence, and everyone in the room knew it. They knew about Gideon. They knew that Gideon had stopped it once. They knew I was aboard and that I was operational. They did not ask me to do anything yet, because asking meant admitting that a single human mechanic aboard a repaired ancient warship was their best option. The politics of that admission were complicated. "Tell them," I said to Sariko, "that I am aware of the situation." "Is that all?" he said. "Tell them I am working on it." I went back to the weapon systems. On the day the fourth system lost contact, I was in the middle of a recalibration sequence on the primary array, when Gideon's sensor network registered an anomaly at the edge of the range I had restored. Not a ship, not a debris field, not anything that scanned as object. A distortion, a region of space where the sensor returns came back wrong, in a way that my instruments flagged as interference, and my instincts flagged as something else. It was the same signature I had seen in the engagement records. I stood very still for a moment in the middle of the primary array chamber, surrounded by the components I had been working on, and I looked at the sensor display Gideon had routed to the panel nearest to me. The distortion was moving. It was not moving toward me. It was moving along a vector that the tactical display immediately calculated as the approach path to the next inhabited system in that direction, a compact member world with a population of 8 billion. I pulled up the weapon system status. 41% operational. I had been hoping for 60 before I needed to use any of it. 41 was not 60. 41 was what I had. I opened a channel to Sariko's vessel. "I need you to move your ship to the interior docking bay," I said. "Right now." I heard the quality of silence that precedes a question. "Do not ask," I said. "Just move." He moved. I sent a signal to the compact on the emergency frequency that Sariko had given me for exactly this contingency. I did not speak. I just transmitted Gideon's sensor data, the distortion, the vector, the calculated time to intercept the inhabited system. I let the data do the explaining. Then I went to the captain's station. It was the first time I had used it. I had been working from repair stations and maintenance panels throughout the ship, coming to the captain's position only to review Sariko's diplomatic communications or check sensor summaries. Sitting in it for operational purposes was different. The chair was older than civilization and it fit me exactly. The array of displays that surrounded it at the captain's station were configured for someone with 2 eyes, 2 hands, a reach, and a visual field that matched mine. 47,000 years ago, someone had sat here. Someone who looked like me, who had learned the ship the same way I learned it, who had taken the same chair and looked at the same displays and understood that this was the place where the decision would be made. I settled in. "All right, Gideon," I said. "Let's go." The drive came online. All of it. Everything I had repaired. Everything I had recalibrated. The 14 kilometers of ancient engineering that had waited in the dark for someone to hear it. The amber lights throughout the ship shifted. Not brighter, steadier. The heartbeat pulse I had felt through the floor since the first day became something you did not feel in your feet but in your chest. We moved. The Compact's fleet was already in motion by the time we reached the intercept point. 14 warships, the best the Compact could put in the field on short notice, holding position at what they had calculated as engagement range. I watched them on the sensor display as I brought Gideon to a position ahead of the fleet and saw the Compact's tactical network light up with queries about what I was doing and whether I was coordinating. I was not coordinating. There was nothing to coordinate. "Stay back," I sent on the tactical channel. One line. I did not elaborate. The distortion arrived. I had seen it in the engagement records enough times to know what to expect, and knowing still did not prepare me for experiencing it. The sensor displays could not resolve it. The visual feed from the external cameras showed nothing in the region where Gideon's sensors placed it. Just normal space, normal stars, and then a wrongness that was not visible as a thing, but as an absence in what should have been there. A region where the universe looked at itself and found something missing. 412 million people in the Relin system. I thought about that number while my hands ran the targeting sequence on Gideon's primary array. I fired. The Compact's fleet, which had not stayed back, immediately lost 3 ships. Not to weapons fire from the silence. To the simple proximity effect, the passive field that the silence generated as a byproduct of its existence. The same field that had unmade 17 civilizations 47,000 years ago. The other 11 ships retreated to a safer distance, and I did not blame them. Gideon shook. Not from being hit, from firing. The strain of running the primary array at 41% capacity through systems I had repaired, but not fully tested under operational load, was enormous. And Gideon communicated this to me, not through the displays, but through the physical reality of the ship around me, the vibration in the decks, and the quality of sound in the hull, and the subtle shifts in the amber lighting that I had learned to read, the way you learn to read a person's face. I kept firing. The distortion changed. It did not retreat yet, but it changed. The way something changes when it encounters resistance it has not felt before, and has to decide what to do about that. In the engagement records, this was the critical moment. The point where the silence evaluated what it was dealing with. It evaluated Gideon. There was a moment, a distinct and unambiguous moment, where the wrongness on my sensor display paused, in a way that wrongness should not be able to pause. A hesitation, a recognition. It knew this ship. Of course it did. Gideon had put marks on it, 47,000 years ago. The last crew had bought those 2,000 years of engagement at the cost of everything they had. And the silence had retreated carrying whatever scars that kind of conflict leaves. And now the ship was back, repaired by different hands, flying under a different captain, running at 41% instead of the full capacity it had once possessed. But back. I brought the secondary array online. I had not intended to use it this early in the engagement, because the secondary array was the system I was least confident in, repaired from the outside in, and not yet fully tested. But the primary array was already at strain, and the silence was not retreating, and the inhabited system with 8 billion people was 20 minutes behind me. The secondary array fired. The output was different from the primary, rougher, less precise, the edges of the beam less clean than the technical documentation described as optimal. But it fired, and it hit, and on my sensor display the distortion did something that I checked 3 times. because I did not initially believe what I was seeing. It moved away. Not far, not fast, but away, on a vector that was not toward me, and not toward the inhabited system, and that Gideon's tactical display immediately identified as heading into deep space, into the outer regions, beyond the mapped lanes, into the dark, where there was nothing to unmake. I kept firing. I fired until the distortion was outside my effective range, and then I fired once more, not because I thought it would connect, but because I wanted to. Then I sat in the captain's chair, in the sudden quiet of a ship that had just done the thing it was built to do, and I breathed for a moment. Gideon's systems settled around me. The vibration in the decks eased. The amber lights steadied from the slight flickering that had accompanied the strain of the engagement back to their usual calm. On the tactical display, the Compact's 11 remaining ships were sending communication requests in a cascade. All at once, everyone with something to say. I looked at those requests for a moment. Then I looked at the repair queue that Gideon had updated while I was firing. A list of systems that needed attention after the strain of the engagement, ranked by priority, and annotated with the Gideon's characteristic precision. The secondary array needed recalibration. The primary array needed 3 specific components inspected and likely replaced. Power distribution to the forward sections had degraded under load, and would need to be rerouted. I reached for my tools. "One moment," I said to the communication requests. I got to work. The secondary array recalibration took 4 hours. I did not rush it. I did not rush any of it, because the Compact's diplomatic messages could wait, and Sariko was patient by nature, and the inhabited system with 8 billion people was still there, unharmed, and the silence was in the outer dark, at a distance that the tactical display measured in light months. Not gone. I knew it was not gone. I had read enough of the engagement records to understand that gone was not something the silence did. It retreated, and it regrouped, and it came back, and the coming back was the constant that 2,000 years of my ancestors' sacrifice had interrupted, not ended. They had bought time, a generation of them after another, smaller crews flying older ships as the years wore on, buying time until there was no one left to fly. Gideon had waited for someone to come and start buying time again. When the secondary array recalibration was done, I went to the communication panel and opened a channel to Sariko first, before the Compact, because Sariko would be straight with me in a way that the Compact's committee of voices would not. "How many people have I got?" I said. He knew what I meant. He had been on Gideon long enough to understand the question. I was one person, one mechanic, running a ship that had been designed for a crew of several hundred, the specific kind of human crew that resonated with Gideon's systems in the way that I resonated with them. I had been flying it alone, because there was no one else. But I had nearly lost the engagement today, not because of skill or tactics, but because of capacity. 41%. Improvised solutions. One person in a captain's chair running sequences that were meant to be distributed across an entire crew. The silence was going to come back. It was always going to come back. "That is what I need to tell you," Sariko said. "The Compact's records. There are people in them. Dara. Scattered across the settled systems. Across 30 or 40 species histories. The ones who appear in maintenance logs and engineering reports, and archaeological records, as the individuals who fixed the things that could not be fixed, across thousands of years of records." I understood. 47,000 years was a long time, long enough for a species to scatter and dilute and blend into the fabric of a galaxy that had moved on and built new civilizations without them, long enough for the specific quality of mind that Gideon needed, that resonant frequency between human cognition and this ship's systems, to appear in unexpected places, in people who did not know what they were carrying. The Compact had records. Sariko had pulled them quietly while I was working, because Sariko was the kind of diplomat who gathered information constantly and considered sharing it carefully, and had apparently decided this was the moment. I thought about what it meant to find those people, to explain what Gideon was, and what the silence was, and what was needed, and ask them to come. Some of them would say no. I had no right to ask anyone to do what my ancestors had done, which was choose this ship and what it required over everything else. But some of them would say yes. Mechanics always know when a thing is worth fixing. "Send me the records," I said. I went to the navigation station and began plotting courses. Not to retreat, not to the compact's protected systems or the fortified stations that politicians would have preferred. Courses to the scattered systems where the records placed those people. The ones who fixed what others had given up on. The ones who might look at a 14-kilometer warship and hear it the way I had heard it. Gideon updated the navigation display as I worked, offering optimal routing, efficient sequencing, the same attentive collaboration we had built across weeks of repairs, and one engagement, and 47,000 years of waiting. I thought about the captain's log. 3 seconds, 1 sentence. Someone worthy will find you. She had not said they would be easy to find. She had not said there would be many of them. She had not made any promises about what it would cost them, or the ship, or the galaxy, to do what needed doing. She just said find. I looked at the navigation display. 17 systems, 17 sets of records, 17 people who did not yet know what was coming for them, in the form of a 14-kilometer warship, and a mechanic with 60 crates of instant coffee, who needed their help. Let's go find the rest of us, I said. Gideon moved. The stars ahead of us shifted as the drive came to full power, the amber lights settling into the particular warm steadiness I had come to recognize as Gideon's version of certainty. Behind us, the compact's 11 ships watched us go, and nobody tried to stop us, because nobody who had just watched what happened was prepared to get in the way. Ahead, the dark. And somewhere in it, people who fixed broken things. We would find them. We had time. Not much. But enough. It was always enough.